Welcome to the June 2026 Q&A on moving to France. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the author of Foolproof French Visas, which is currently in the complete 2026 edition. It's the 6th edition of this book, which has lots of yearly updates on everything to do with visas, carte de séjour, renewals, and the process of relocating to France. I'm the owner of the relocation agency Your Transformation, and we help people to get the right visa and do the right French admin to have a successful and sustainable new life in France. So there's a lot of admin to do. Getting the visa is just the beginning of a lot of admin tasks that you're going to have to do to set up your life in France, particularly if you want to stay long term and have the option of staying long term. And we help to make sure that you do everything correctly and get everything set up so renewals go as smoothly as they can. There's all kinds of problems that can happen when you don't set up a French bank account or don't get on the French healthcare system, don't exchange your driver's license, et cetera, et cetera. And so we help you to get all of those things done so that renewals and everything go as smoothly as they can. So, what we are going to start with today is I want to talk to you before we get into all of the questions. I would like to tell you about the 2026 Relocate to France Virtual Summit, which is happening this month. It starts in 2 weeks. You may have seen some emails come through. If you've been on our email list for a while, we've sent out a couple of announcements about it. And basically, this event is a 5-day long event where you are going to have about 20 different presentations on all different aspects of moving to France, from currency and banking to purchasing property to understanding French taxes or US taxes as an American living outside the US, to learning French, to visas and setting up businesses, and all of the different topics that are going to be relevant to you, whether you are a year or more out from your relocation to France, whether you're planning on moving before the end of the year, or whether it's something that you've arrived in France recently and want to make sure that you're doing everything that you should be doing and that you understand all of these topics. So before we get into our questions, I just want to give you a little sneak peek at our online community where the summit will be happening. It is mostly happening on Zoom, but we also have a little pop-up community that's sort of a hybrid between a Slack channel and a Facebook group so that you can meet with other attendees and ask questions, and then a virtual exhibition stand so that you can also go around and meet the different professionals that are making the presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat. The Relocate to France Virtual Summit is free to attend live, but we will have the full set of recordings available for purchase if you'd like to watch the sessions later, if you can't attend everything, etc. So we have our kickoff daily at 1:30 p.m. France time, which is 7:30 a.m. Eastern. Presentations go until about 8, and then we have a little wrap up at the end of the day. So you get a good 4 to 5 presentations per day, everything from understanding visa types and building your relocation plan, moving your belongings and pets, banking and currency, understanding the healthcare system, navigating the French property market, whether that is going to be in Paris or in the French Riviera, opportunities for studying in France, finding your dream rental property, self-employment, advocacy on voting, taxes, and banking, and then all kinds of topics related to both French and US taxes, along with financial planning and investing. So a really full, complete slate of presentations that are going to be really interesting for you guys. We had about over 600 people last year attend at least one session, and 800 people registered total, including those who purchased the recordings and weren't really able to come live. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you guys to register. And again, if you can't attend live, or if you can only attend a couple things live and you want to be able to watch some of the sessions later, totally fine to get the recordings and submit some questions in advance so that they're answered during the sessions like we do for our Q&A sessions. And then you'll be able to watch the replays. So the link is Relocate to France Summit.com, and I just put it in the chat. Without further ado, I'm going to get into our questions for this evening. If I look like I'm not looking at the camera, it's because I am reading your questions. I'm going to go through everything that was pre-submitted first in the order that it was submitted, and then if I have time, I will be able to get some questions from the chat or the Q&A box. Amanda, if you have more than one passport, US, UK, Canada, do you need to include copies of all passports in your application? Are there things to look out for if you have more than one citizenship? So the only reason why you might apply with one passport over another, if there is a particular visa type that is available to one visa to one passport holder but not another. So for example, if you're Canadian, you have access to the Canadian work holiday visa, which can be renewed. It's up to 18 months of an initial work experience if you're under 35. That visa is not available in the same way to citizens of the US and the UK. Um, so it could be something that you might take into account. There are certain things, certain documents that they ask for if you're from the UK that they don't for a visitor visa that they don't ask for if you are from the US. Most notably, certain types of visa insurance are different for UK and US citizens. So there's that to take into account. But other than that, the procedure is the same across all applications. There is one box on the visa form that asks if you had a different nationality at birth, so you would need to indicate that. But there's no reason to include copies of all of your passports, and they really don't care. In terms of getting a visa, I wouldn't say that any of those is more advantageous than the other. People with all of those passports don't have a particularly difficult time getting visas. So any is fine. Easton, for the entrepreneur visa, I currently own a business, but I'm planning to transition to a new LLC before applying. Will the consulate accept financial history from my previous business, or do they only look at the new entity? I'll have a money trail under the old LLC, but less history under the new one. So it doesn't, for if you're applying for the talent passport entrepreneur visa, it does not matter how many or which different company structures you have had. What they're looking for is more than 5 years of professional experience. There is a section on one of the forms that asks like how many businesses have you run or managed. So we would need to have details on any of the companies that you have been in charge of or have owned. I wouldn't necessarily recommend setting up a new LLC though if you're moving to France, because you'll need to set up a French entity and primarily be receiving money into the French business. So there can be some legitimate reasons to keep an LLC active, like if you have a 401k or retirement account in it, or if you have certain like licensing requirements or client requirements that would make it really difficult for your clients to pay a non-US company. We've had people set up an LLC and then use the LLC to pay the French entity and make sure that your salary and social charges are all correctly paid in France. But I would not necessarily think, without having a conversation with you, I don't know that it's a good idea to open a new LLC right before moving to France. And I probably would advise against it unless there's a really specific reason for doing that. Similarly, for financial history, they're not necessarily looking at financial history. They're looking at history of running the business if you need to show proof of 5 years of professional experience. In terms of putting together the visa application, they're looking at your future business activity and particularly your business activity in France. And what's happened up until this point doesn't necessarily matter. We have clients who have established businesses that are transitioning them to France. We also have people who were in a completely different field or salaried employees who are moving to France and starting a totally new business. So not super important to have the financial history. Also, for the entrepreneur visa, what does the Chicago consulate specifically look for in a business plan for a fully remote service-based business with US clients? What makes or breaks an application like mine? So first of all, the applications are the same no matter what consulate you go to. The requirements are the same, and all of the applications are submitted to the TLS company, but then they're overnighted to the French consulate in Washington, and that's where the applications are looked at and approved. In terms of a fully remote service-based business with the US clients, that is not a good candidate to get an entrepreneur visa of any kind, but particularly a visa for profession libérale. So if you're setting up a French company and going for the Passeport Talent Entrepreneur, it requires either 5 years of professional experience or a master's degree, and it requires a 30,000 euro investment and setting up a French entity, like basically a French equivalent of an LLC, an S Corp, or a corporation. Your two company options are going to be a SARL, sometimes called an EURL if it's owned by only one person, or an SAS or an SASU, again, U if it's only owned by one person. If you set up the French company and the French company only invoices US clients or only invoices a US LLC that's invoicing people in the US, totally fine. But for profession libérale, that's when you're going to be self-employed in your own name. And for that, they're specifically looking at what your business activity is going to be in France, what contacts, networking, and potential clients you have on French territory. And that's how part of how they're evaluating your business and whether or not your business is going to be viable. So if you go with a business plan that has fully remote services only offered to US clients, your visa is going to be rejected. That being said, we sometimes have clients in that situation where they don't necessarily have established clientele in France, and they do get letters of support and networking and people who will support their business visa application. Once you arrive in France and register your activity, it doesn't really matter where the money comes from. They're not looking at whether you had a certain percentage of French clients. They're looking at, did you have clients? Did you earn money? Did you report the money, as income and pay social taxes and income taxes on that income, as you should be doing when you reside in France? So I think that's worth having a conversation about the best way to set it up and what elements you can put into your business application to get it approved. I will say, and we have a couple more business questions later in the Q&A. One of the things we will be doing after the summit is we will be launching a complete French business incubator. It's our online program that helps people with the business visa application and provides support in terms of calls with me and a review of your visa application and helping to make sure that you get your business all set up correctly before you apply for the visa and then after you arrive in France. And normally it includes 2 calls and 1 visa application review. Over the summer, we're going to do for anybody who comes to the summit and signs up over the summer for the Complete French Business Incubator, we're going to add in 3 workshops so that you can come and chat about your business and get a little bit of extra help with developing the business plan and getting some questions answered about how to structure things. So keep an eye out for that. Matt, I am employed by a large UK company and looking to participate in their international remote working scheme and therefore require evidence of my right to work in France. As a UK national visiting for 20 days and only conducting salaried work, how do I obtain such a permit? As far as I know, there's no such thing that exists. If you're coming for 20 days, that's called vacation, and nobody is issuing permits to people who can check emails and work remotely on vacation. If you're working remotely, typically is, requires a visa for you to be able to work in France once you become a resident. But for a stay less than 3 months, where there's no way on earth that you're becoming a tax resident or establishing residency of any kind while you're on vacation, to the best of my knowledge, that doesn't exist. I've never heard of anybody getting such a thing. Andy, how long can you stay on a visa? So there are 2 types. There's more than 2 types of visas, but basically there's short stay visas, which are for tourism. Those typically go to people in, countries like most African countries, a lot of Asian countries, where they will allow you to have stays up to 90 days. And those, Americans, Canadians, British, etc., we don't need those because we can travel to France for up to 90 days just on our passport and stay in Schengen for up to 90 out of 180 days. Long stay visas or D visas, there are 2 main types. There are all of the regular visas that are classified as VLSTS, which is Visa de Long Séjour Valant Titre de Séjour. These are 12-month visas that you validate online when you arrive in France, and then when you renew them, you request a long-term residence or permit. There are over a dozen different visa types that are called VLSTS. So whenever anybody says that online, it's like, oh, I'm going to apply for a VLSTS. Like, okay, but which one? Because there's a lot. Usually they mean visitor visa, but not always. And then there are the talent passport types, which can either be issued like a VLSTS, which is for 12 months, and then you validate it online and get a residence permit later. Or the most common type is that the visa is issued for 90 days, but a 90-day long stay D-type visa. And then within the first 2 months of that visa, you need to request a carte de séjour through the online account. Talent passport can technically be a multi-year card from the first time that it's issued, so you can get 1 to 4 years. And a lot of times that just depends on the strength of your finances and the strength of your project, depending on if you're investing money into something, if you have a business that might take a little bit longer time to get up and running, etc. But at that point, we're in carte de séjour territory, not really visa territory. Technically, visa is the sticker in your passport. Once it's validated, you get an additional paper from OFI, which makes it your first titre de séjour. So the sticker plus the validation is a titre de séjour. A titre de séjour is also renewed. And when you renew it, you get a physical plastic card, which is a carte de séjour. And so a lot of people use these terms interchangeably, and sometimes I do too, but there is a difference. And when you've been in France for 10 years, like you don't have a 10-year visa. You have a residence card that is valid for 10 years. Two questions about applying for visas. Laura asks, can I apply for residency from Albania or France if I am a US citizen? And then Kara asks, is there any way to apply for a student visa once you're already in France? So when you are applying for your initial visa, you need to apply from a country where you have citizenship or legal residence. So if you're a US citizen and that's your only nationality and you reside in the US, then you need to apply from the US. And you can go to any one of the TLS application centers. There are 10 to submit your visa application, and you need to stay in the US while you wait for your passport to get back to you. If you have a residence permit from another country, you can apply in that country. So if you're a US citizen living in Albania and you have the equivalent of, an Albanian carte de séjour, you have a residence permit giving you legal residence in Albania, then you can apply in Albania. We've had US citizens who live in Portugal or Spain who have applied from the French consulate in Madrid, and that's not a problem because they had legal residence permits for those countries. But if you're just a US citizen and you are in France and you're like, hey, I really want to stay, oh, you know what? Let me go to London and apply for a visa from London. You're not going to be able to do that unless you have right to remain in the UK or some kind of long-term visa in the UK. And you cannot apply for if you only just came on your passport, you cannot apply for anything directly in France. You need to go back to your home country and apply from your home country. Andy also asked, where are some of the most affordable places to live in France? Not Paris, not Nice, not any of the big cities. There's a lot of affordable property out a little bit in the countryside. A lot of people find that the cost of living is really low in like Charente-Maritime, in Charente, in Dordogne, in the southwest kind of area. Anywhere where you get away from the major cities and it's not a major tourist attraction or not an area where a lot of expats go or a lot of English speaking immigrants go, you can find some pretty reasonable housing costs. So I would say if you avoid the big cities, you can find pretty reasonable property prices and rents. And even, around the big cities, some of the suburbs can be really affordable. I'm in the eastern suburbs of Paris, which are expensive compared to living in the suburbs of Montpellier, but still affordable compared to, we have twice as much space for the same rent as Paris. So reasonable. Glenn, how can you apply for French healthcare coverage as a Canadian only spending 4 months or so a year in France? You cannot. When you are residing in France, you need to be spending at least 6 months in France per year to have a renewable visitor visa. And technically, you really should be spending at least 9 months in France. If you're out of the country more than 3 months, they do have grounds to question, whether or not you're actually residing in France. And I have seen rejections of renewals for people who haven't been spending enough time in France, not of our clients, but of, people on the internet. There are various social media groups that I follow that are in French for people of all nationalities living in France, and they can be quite tough. To be on the healthcare system, you need to be residing in France at least 6 months out of the year. So it's not going to be possible to get on the French healthcare system if you're only spending 4 months in France per year. Opening up a bank account in France, steps and requirements. Well, again, if you're only spending 4 months of the year in France, you're going to have a problem potentially opening a French bank account unless you own property or have some type of economic tie, like a business or a rental property or something like that in France. So Typically, what you need to do to open a bank account is you need to have some type of address with where you have a utility bill. You're able to get mail there. They're going to need proof of ID. If you're renting, some banks might not open an account for you until you have a tax number or you're purchasing property or something like that. So it's really going to depend on the branch of the bank and their policies. Most banks right now are requiring people to actually physically go in person. It was pretty rare before for them to open bank accounts remotely for people, but it seems to have gotten even more difficult recently. So, typically, what we advise is when you move to France, you get your visa, you find your long-term address, you validate your visa, you get, utilities and everything set up in your name. So you have an electric bill showing consumption of electricity, you have renter's insurance, you have all the things that show you're actually residing in France. And then once you have those, you can set those up with a Wise account or some type of like Revolut or something. You don't have to have a French IBAN to set up an electricity account. But then once you have those things, then you can open up the French account and switch the utilities over to the French account for the prefecture to see that you're using your French bank account in France. Guys, I'm not able to look at the questions in the chat because I'm looking at the questions that were submitted in advance. So once I'm finished with these ones, I will see if I can get to some that are in the chat as well. There were a couple questions that were submitted that are really vague, like what are your questions? All kinds like healthcare and renting long term. Like you got to give me a little bit more of a question for those kinds of things. Renting with pets. I'll answer that one briefly. We do have a session on it or we have a session on pets during the summit, including like relocating with them, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about renting as well. But basically, apartments are not allowed to discriminate against you for having pets, so I wouldn't even bring it up unless you have like a Rottweiler or a category 1 or 2 dangerous dog that can be prohibited by both the town and the rules of the property. They can't put into your lease any type of prohibition on pets. They can't require any additional rent or anything like that from you. So there's no problem renting with pets. Jerry, a link from the French consulate of Atlanta says that the visas can be submitted up to 6 months prior to the start date and that approvals may take 3 to 4 months. Okay, so you were looking at the information on Schengen visas. Those are the tourist visas that are required for somebody who cannot travel to France on just their passport. Those are submitted a longer time in advance. They're for people like, let's say, I have a friend before she was naturalized American. She was Tunisian. And so if she wanted to come to France, she had a sister who lived in France. And if she wanted to come, she had to submit a visitor visa, a tourist visa application to a French consulate to be able to come because with her Tunisian passport, she could not just come like buy a plane ticket. I want to go to France for a week and here's my passport. And there are a lot of countries like that. So that's what we're talking about when you're looking at 6 months before a start date and approvals taking 3 to 4 months. That's Schengen visas or tourist visas, or sometimes you'll see C visas. Foolproof French visas says nothing of the sort. Foolproof French visas says that visitor visas can be submitted up to 3 months prior to your arrival in France. So usually what we advise is having your visa appointment about a month before your planned departure date. There's not necessarily a reason to do it way earlier than that unless you live far from the consulate and have a lot of restrictions on when you can travel to your visa appointment. But yeah, they don't take anywhere near 90 days to process. Most of our clients have their passports back in a week. I advise leaving a month just to feel safe so you're not feeling like, you're waiting for your passport 2 days before you're supposed to get on a plane because that's very stressful. But yeah, I advise people to have your visa appointment around a month before you want to be on a plane. Start working with us 3 to 4 months before you want to arrive in France. That's plenty of time. Okay, Dale, looking for representation for work as an actor. I'm almost 80. Any advice? Well, in order to you would have to get a profession artistique visa to have work as an actor in France. So that would require either, finding an agent beforehand and potentially having some things lined up before you can put together and submit a profession artistique visa application. Joe, I had read earlier this year the Prime Minister are looking. Oh, this is a question about political posturing. There was Gérald Darmanin, who is the current, he's been the Minister of Everything. He was Minister of the Interior for a while. They're talking about limiting immigration or pausing it for 3 years. It's political posturing. I'm not going to speculate on it. The people who are coming, to set up businesses or retire in France are not the people they're trying to kick out. But in any case, if there were any kind of attempt to do anything like this, one, first you'd have to have an election in 2027 that would make this a priority um, for a candidate. That person would have to actually be elected. It would have to be presented in Parliament, and it would have to be debated by the National Assembly and the Senate and pass. And then it would have to be approved by the Constitutional Council. So there are a lot of steps between somebody like having clickbaity headlines on social media and things actually being implemented. And already, based on the 2024 immigration law, there was a lot of stuff in that bill that got taken out because, one, it was not appealing to a wide range of senators and representatives, and two, a lot of the things that got left in a watered down version were canceled by the Constitutional Council that basically said these things are illegal. And also, a lot of these things would be unconstitutional, not just at the French level, but at the European level. So I don't want to speculate on people getting clicks from that kind of stuff. I don't think there's anything to worry about in the near future. All right. Catherine, living in Germany until I retire from the military in 2027 with pension and disability income. Would still work, but exploring VLSTS or student, I suppose, visa to finish master's degree using VA benefits. Can I apply from Germany as an American and switch to the student visa? So you can apply from Germany, but you need to apply from the right visa type from the beginning. So if you're accepted into a master's program in France, then you apply for your student visa through Germany. In this case, you're not going to go to Campus France, you're going to go straight through the consulate. Whereas if you go back to the US and have to apply from the US, you have to go through Campus France. I assume you're comparing the visitor visa to the student visa because you say VLSTS or student. But you need to apply directly for the visa type that you mean to have. There's no switching, like there's no getting to France on any visa type and then switching immediately to something else. That's not a thing that you can do. We do have clients in Germany who were on military bases who applied for visas from like Frankfurt. Other than Airbnb, what are other ways to secure housing? So it's terrible. I'm kind of anti-Airbnb and have been from the beginning, and I've never booked an Airbnb myself, but I do always use it as shorthand for finding short-term housing that's longer than a hotel stay. You have a couple of options. There are gîtes, which are basically short-term furnished rentals before Airbnb was a thing, that are all over France. If you're on a student visa, you have a little bit more flexibility because you can get what's called a bi-mobilité, mobility lease, which is more flexible and better for the landlord than a long-term lease. And so they're more willing to set that up for you. We have clients who we had some that reserved like a 90-day stay in a hotel. It was like an apart hotel where basically they just had to give 7 days notice to leave. So they reserved for 3 months. They only had to pay, I think, 30 days up front. And then after that, they only had to give 7 days notice, and anything beyond 7 days would be canceled. So they came, they started looking for their long-term housing. And then when they found the place that they leased, they were able to cancel the hotel, and basically they had 7 more days to live in the hotel where they were getting their lease signed and planning their move in and things like that. And it worked out really well for them. If you're in Germany, you can certainly make a trip to France where you're going to be living and find housing and just secure a long-term lease before you actually apply for your visa. That's doable too. We also have some services that we work with to find leases for you, to help you sign a lease as a foreigner. And in those cases, they can do it remotely for you. It depends on whether or not you absolutely want to visit the place in person, or whether you are fine with that company like doing the visits and the état de lieu and kind of advocating for you and signing on your behalf. Okay, Enrico, marriage visa with a European resident. Okay, so I don't actually know if you mean, so there's two different things here. One is is it an EU resident or an EU citizen who's living in France? Because EU resident like doesn't really do anything for you in terms of getting you a visa. So you would still have to qualify on your own. If your partner is an EU citizen and you're married to them or you're getting married, then you can apply for a carte de séjour as the spouse of a French citizen and prove that, you have to prove first that you have health care. The person either has to be working or they have to show financial resources sufficient to support you, and then they can sponsor your visa. But you have to arrive in France first and apply within 3 months. So I'm not totally clear what you mean. I need more detailed information in the question. Lindsay, my VLSTS, I assume you mean visitor visa, expires in early January 2027. I will be in France mid-September to mid-November and will initiate the renewal as soon as possible. I'm going to skip some personal identifying information. Does not staying there long enough to avail of the VLS impact its renewal. It looks like my trip for the next year can only be 2 to 3 months duration, max visiting twice or thrice per year. Yeah, so if you are not spending most of your year in France, you should not have a renewable visitor visa. And you should not be on the French healthcare system. Having a visitor visa that you are renewing is you're not renewing the option to come to France as often as you feel like. You're telling the French government that you reside in France. So unfortunately, if you have, family members back home that you're taking care of, if you're not able to spend very much time in France, you should not be renewing your French visa. And I think that you could have problems with renewal. Again, I've seen now with the entry exit system, they are able to track like the dates that people are coming into and leaving the European Union. It used to be passport stamps, but yeah, people, if they're spending 4, 5, 6 months outside of France, one, you shouldn't be on the French healthcare system because you're not eligible for it. Two, you're not really eligible to be renewing your visa. And, in the past, it was easier for things to kind of slip through the cracks because they weren't asking for the right documents and the right questions, but I mean, they know now who's in and who's out. Like they're tracking when you're coming and when you're going. And yeah, if you spend too much time outside of France, you don't live in France. All right, there's a second question. Will I need a medical exam for the renewal? And does the prefecture communicate that to me via email that I must use a physician in that prefecture? I will be looking for a house or apartment to purchase on this upcoming trip. My address is an Airbnb in Arles, where I stayed for 5 weeks on my last trip, which the owner allowed. Okay. Do not register your visa to an Airbnb. You can have an Airbnb for your initial housing when you first arrive, like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, like enough time to sort of settle and figure out exactly where you want to be and find your housing. That takes time. You do not want to validate your visa to an Airbnb. You find your long-term housing first. You get the electricity contract set up in your name. You set it up now with a bill, getting a bill every 2 months. The default is to get a bill every year. You need to get a bill every 2 months. And once you're in a long-term address that you are going to maintain, where you have your name on the mailbox, you can get mail in your name, you have utilities set up, then you validate your visa to that address. And then, of course, you also have, okay, for the first 6 weeks, I stayed in an Airbnb. Then I have this lease. Now I have my first month's rent receipt and my gas bill or my electric bill in my name. Those are your documents for getting on the healthcare system, among other things. But it's really important that you have a long-term address, that you have electricity bills, that you open a French bank account, that you get on the French healthcare system, that you have these bills that are showing there. When you send them electricity bills to the healthcare system, they're not just looking at is that proof of address. They're also looking at does the electricity consumption show that the number of people who say they're living there are actually living there. So if you have a friend write you an attestation saying that you're living with her and you're not, they're going to see on the bill that, oh, it doesn't look like 2 people are living in this apartment based on statistics about how much electricity is consumed in an apartment. You know, we had some people where, it was a family of three and they were saying they were staying with a friend that and using her address. And I'm looking at the bills, like the administration is going to pick up on the fact that they're not actually living where they said they were living. And that's not great, guys. It's really not. And it's going to cause a lot of problems. Maybe not immediately, maybe not immediately, but okay, Marlena, what is the best visa to apply for as a retiree? So this is confusing to some people because there actually is a visa called a retirement visa or a retirement carte de séjour. We don't cover it in foolproof French visas, and I don't talk about it because it's not for you. It is for people who worked in France, who paid into the French system, who receive a French pension, who now no longer live in France, and they get a 10-year card where they can go back for a period of up to a year, but they can no longer establish permanent residence in France. So it's a really specific niche type of visa, and almost nobody I talk to would be entitled to a French pension at all. So when you're living off of savings, you're living off of your, US Social Security, your 401k, your British pension, whatever, you are applying for a long-term visitor visa, not a retirement visa, and not a VLSTS. There's VLSTS, there's salary, there's family, there's profession libérale is a VLSTS. There's a ton of them. So you need to be specific about which one you're applying for. Price of visas. Okay, that's a kind of vague question, but the fee at the consulate is 99 euros for processing a visa application unless there are some exceptions. Now, the fees for validating your visa and renewing your visa have just gone up. They went up on May 1st. We're going to add it into foolproof French visas very soon, or send out info to the people who bought the book. Validating your visa after arrival used to be 200 euros, now it's 300 euros. Requesting a first carte de séjour used to be 225 euros. Now it is 350 euros. So this is going to be, in most cases, it's going to be your first renewal, or it's going to be, if you're a talent passport holder, like création d'entreprise or whatever, you're typically going to pay 350 euros. And then renewals after that, it used to be 225 euros. Now it's 250 euros. Those are going to be the main fees for submitting your visa application and having it processed at the consulate and then validating your visa after arrival. Doesn't include things like, translation and stuff that's extra. Appointment fees are a great scam right now. Excuse my French. In the UK, an appointment with TLS is about 45 pounds-ish, maybe a little bit more. In Canada, I want to say it's about 50 to 75 Canadian dollars, somewhere in that range. In the US, the appointment fee has gone up to 220 euros. And that's per person. They also have primetime appointments, which are an extra like $80. So if you want to go like before business hours, between 7 and 9 a.m. or after business hours from like 3 to 5 p.m., you have to get a primetime appointment. Well, guess what? Every time I go in to check for somebody for appointments, all they have is prime time. So I don't know if they have any regular time appointments, if they have one regular time appointment per slot, but only prime time appointments for families with multiple people, or, they have 10 different appointment slots at 7:30 a.m. and only one appointment slot at 10 and 11 and whatever. I don't know. I'm a little bit suspicious. But yeah, the appointment fees in the US are very high now. But there's not a whole lot we can do about it. Mike, I'd like to apply for a self-supporting visa, and I believe I have enough investment income to qualify. So again, this is a visitor visa. But I'm an artist and would still like to legally sell my art after settling in France. As I understand it, the low value of my art sales will not qualify me for a talent visa. What are my options? So unfortunately, your options are you are on a visitor visa and you can't work or sell anything, or you're on an artist visa and you need to make 70% of minimum wage. So it's not, when you're on the artist visa, the income amount is not the same. It's 70% of minimum wage, which, let me get out my little calculator and I can tell you what that is. Smeek right now, minimum wage is 1,823 euros per month. So 70% of that would be 1,276 euros per month gross. So if you're not making 1,276 euros per month on art, and that could be 12,000 euros in one month and 2,000 euros in another month and no euros the rest of the month, that would be fine. It doesn't have to be regular month to month. But yeah, either you have to make enough to qualify for the income minimum and set up the business, or unfortunately, you can't sell. One thing you could do, and I've advised this to other people with who make some type of physical, artisanal product. Sometimes we say things like, well, if you want to paint, like donate your paintings to the local association that can sell them and they get the money for some type of cause that's important to you. But unfortunately, there's no such thing as having a part-time business. My husband would be joining me, but he plans to continue teaching online for colleges in the US. I know France does not specifically have a digital nomad visa, but what visa would be best for him? So that would be a profession libérale visa where he would have to put together a business plan. And again, for that, we're looking at putting together some type of elements of, how would this business activity develop in France? Like what networking, would he be able to teach a class at a study abroad program or something like that? Whether or not those things actually materialize after arrival, not necessarily important, but essential for putting together the visa application and getting the visa. Kathy, is it more recommended to rent or buy an apartment in France if you intend to stay long term? What is required to rent versus buy? So it really depends on your life circumstances, whether you plan on being in the same place for a long time, whether it's affordable based on your financial resources, whether who might inherit your property after you pass, if you pass as a resident in France, whether the cost of buying is significantly more than the cost of renting if you're in Paris. Buying is, I don't think I will ever be able to afford to buy in Paris. It's crazy expensive. So it really depends on your life circumstances and where you plan on buying, and even things like how old you are at the time of buying, whether or not you'd be able to pay fully in cash or whether you'd need a mortgage. Renting versus buying does not impact your visa in any way. But I would say we're having sessions on renting and buying property during the Relocate to France virtual summit with different presenters who are working with buyers and renters to find and acquire their property. Again, whether it's buying or renting. So I would highly suggest coming and watching those sessions and seeing what questions you need to ask yourself about where you want to live, where you want to be, what kind of property you want to be in, what makes the most sense for you, both financially and logistically. Patricia, in a dossier for a visa talent artistique et culturel, approximately how many pages should the artistic project description and income projections be? Long enough to describe your project. Most of our business applications are between 15 and 25 pages for the business plan. Sometimes we include a market study, sometimes we don't, again, depending on the activity. Income projections, we do monthly for 3 years, and then we do 3 years with income and expenses. And we have templates and instructions for how to do all of that in our Complete French Business Incubator, where again, we'll be doing those special sessions over the summer. T. Can you please talk about interest-bearing accounts, livret or otherwise, that Americans can have in France without issues? So any livret at your bank, like a livret A, an LDD, a livre épargne logement, an LEL, or just like any type of basic savings account that's interest bearing is totally fine. You do have to report all of the interest on your US taxes. Anything like an assurance vie, a PEA, where you invest in mutual funds, is typically going to cause issues because they're going to be PFICs, and you do not want to deal with PFICs. Again, we're going to have accountants at the summit. You can ask questions about PFICs if you want. You don't want to know anything about PFICs. If you are working in France and you have the opportunity to invest for retirement, there are two types of accounts called a PER, a Plan d'Épargne Retraite, and a PERCO, which is set up through a company. And those typically are treated by the US like a 401k is treated in France, meaning that it's a protected retirement account where anything that happens within the wrapper of that account is not going to cause issues. So, if you invest in a mutual fund in your PERCO or your PER, and I was just researching this and talking to my accountant and a financial advisor that we refer people to about this. So I have confirmed this with with multiple financial and investment professionals that typically you're not going to have a problem with a PECO or a PERE. But anything like an assurance vie or anything that your banker suggests to you because they get a little commission on selling you whatever their investment of the day is, it's not a good idea if you're American. You didn't actually, oh, you did say you were in Texas. Okay. So I assume you're American. But if you're British or Canadian and you don't have to worry about a PFIC, then it doesn't matter. Talk to an investment advisor about like what are the good things to invest in France if your home country does not care about what you invest in. Do I have to change my French bank account if I move from one French city to the other? Can I not keep the same one regardless of where I live once I've opened the account? So normally your IBAN, your bank account identifying information, is not going to change if you move. But you do need to go into your local agency and change your address and change the account over to your local bank so you can go and do transactions in person. And because sometimes they like to meet you, although I can't think of the last time I actually met with my banker. There are some agencies, like we work a lot with the International AXA agency. They're down near Toulouse. They work with people all over France. They're fully English speaking, so you wouldn't need to change if you were with them or you would with one of the online banks. Therese, what kind of visa do I need for buying or renting an apartment in France? You do not. Buying and renting an apartment does not require a visa unless you plan on actually residing in that apartment and staying long term. I want to buy a property in France to live for 90-day periods for 2 to 3 times per year. I do not want to rent it out as I only want it for personal use. Is a good measure to hire a property management company to look after, ensuring that no squatters settle, and do the authorities actually have power to remove them immediately? There are a lot of challenges in France with squatters. I don't know about the prevalence of them. I would say you want to have somebody checking on your property regularly, making sure that nobody's able to get in. I don't really know the tips for avoiding them because I don't own property that I don't live in all the time. So, I would certainly talk to a management property or make sure that you have somebody who can check on it regularly. Is it true that if one specifies in a certain French document, such as a will or other similar to a trust in the USA, that upon your death you want USA inheritance rules and trust to take control over the inheritance? Is this something a French lawyer can handle, and at what point? Should it be documented, such as prior to applying for a long-term visa, or wait until one is actually in France on the residence visa? So you don't have to do it before applying for the visa. And there are some inheritance rules that don't apply until after you've been residing in France for more than 5 years. So I do recommend talking to a tax attorney about how to structure your investments, particularly if you have a trust. Trusts are bad news if you live in France, because France does not like foreign trusts. And so it's really important that you talk to somebody about how to structure your assets and maybe even dissolve the trust before becoming a French resident. Now, in terms of inheritance, there are some provisions that say that you can designate U.S. Provisions to apply to your assets, and you can do that with the help of a French notaire. We have one who will be presenting on this topic at the virtual summit. Unfortunately, our trust guy is not available for the summit. But basically, it's currently a matter of litigation before the European courts. It's important to talk to a notaire up front, understand what's going to happen based on what you want your will to do and how you want your assets to be treated after you pass, and that that's going to be possible, and what happens if there are any challenges to what you write. Richard, I do not have a current income from a pension or 401k, only 1,100 per month from Social Security. I have a lot in savings and a great deal in real estate. I plan on applying for a visitor visa to go to Lyon at the end of June. Would it be possible for me to find an apartment in Lyon with this financial background? For the landlord who wants a full year's rent paid up front, how is it arranged where I can get month's rent returned if I move out early? Okay, so we don't normally do rentals because it's very complicated to find rental apartments for foreigners, and I'm not in real estate and I'm not licensed. Anybody who is doing rentals for a third party should have something called a T card. And in fact, for any real estate transaction, there are a couple of very, let's say, prominent companies or individuals doing real estate searches and apartment searches for people who do not have their own T card, and they are operating as like partners with somebody else who has the T card. So it's really important to, if you're working with somebody, to find you an apartment, whether it's to rent or buy, that you're checking that they themselves have the credentials and are qualified in the French system, and that you question people to see if if you're thinking of having them help you, that they are actually qualified to do so. That's my little rant about that today. Um, in terms of, what your income and assets need to be, a company like Garant Me, so a lease guarantee service, will often provide you with a guarantee, even if it's based largely on on your assets and not on your income. And then it's a matter of finding landlords that will accept it. So it can be very tricky if you are in a big, desirable city like Lyon and you're looking for an apartment where your budget isn't super high and then your income is not three times the budget, but you have a lot of savings. It can be really complicated. And unfortunately, it's just going to take the time that it takes, and you need to really hustle to find a place and take what you can get. Now, in terms of setting up a caution bancaire where you're putting a year's worth of rent in a fund to block, technically the landlord has to agree for funds to be taken out of that account and unblocked. So usually that's going to stay active for the entire duration of the time that you rent. And it's not that you it's not that you put the money in and then your rent gets taken out of the account. It's that you put the money in the account and it's blocked, and then you pay the rent, and then when you move out, you get the money back from the account. So basically, it's not you pay a year's worth of rent up front, it's that you put the money in the bank, but then you still have to pay on an ongoing basis. If a landlord is asking you for a full year of rent up front, run. It's not legal with most residential type leases. It would technically be okay with something called a bail code civil, which is basically the new fancy French landlord way of getting around actual housing law. Sometimes those lease types are unavoidable, especially in Paris. It's really hard to find any places that are rented any other way except for that. So sometimes there's not a lot that you can do because you need to have a lease and find actual housing. But it is very, very risky to do that, and I would not take doing that lightly. Easton, if I don't get accepted on an entrepreneur visa, if Erasmus Mundus College is an option for 2 years, I don't know what that is. So if you mean like a student exchange type of program, like, yeah, you could get a student visa for that, but then you have to figure out like, what are you going to do after the student visa? Jennifer, is it possible to switch to a Passport Talent from a Passport Talent Famille provided you have a CDI job that already qualifies you independent of your spouse? How does one go about doing this? Just renewed the Passport Talent Famille, which is good through 2029. I wouldn't bother until 2029 because a Passport Talent Famille carte de séjour enables you to do any type of work. So it's a lot more advantageous than any other type of visa. And if you end up losing the job that would qualify you for the Passeport Talent, I assume you mean Passeport Talent Carte Bleue Européenne. If you end up losing that job, like you could find a job with lower pay, but if you switch to the Passeport Talent Carte Bleue Européenne and then for whatever reason that doesn't work out and you need to find another job, like your new job would have to qualify for the same, the work contract would have to meet the same criteria. So if you got the Passport Talent Famille, there's no reason to switch to something else. The main reason to switch to something else would be if you're getting to the end of your Famille card and you are no longer with the person who made you eligible for the talent passport, like, yes, then you would need to switch your status at renewal. Jane, I am a French citizen married to a U.S. spouse and living in the USA for 40 years. Now I've returned to France every year, occasionally staying 3+ months. He would like to be able to stay in France with me more than 3 months. What kind of visa could he apply for, and would it be difficult to get one? We would not be trying to be a resident in France and to get onto Social Security. So if you're not actually trying to reside in France long term, I would say that your spouse's best visa type is going to be a short-term visitor visa that's not renewable. Get a temporary visa for like 4 or 5 months before you want to go to France for specifically the amount of time that you're going to be staying. Because when you apply for a long-term family visa as the spouse of a French citizen, one, it assumes that you have registered the marriage with the Service d'État Civil in Nantes. And two, it assumes that the person is going to be establishing residence in France. And so there are a certain number of obligations that go along with that visa type, including the medical visit, if your spouse is over 65, they won't have to do the civics classes, the language classes, the civics test, all of that stuff. They will be exempt from that. But if they're under 65, they would have to do all of that. And if you're not going to be there and you're going to leave and then you're going to come back and then you're going to try to renew the visa, like it's going to be too much. You're never going to be able to get everything done and you're going to cause a lot of problems. So my advice would be stick with a temporary visa, get it for, it doesn't have to be the long-term renewable visa for a full year. If you want to go for 4 months, like you get a 4-month visa. And then it doesn't count for your 90 out of 180 days for any other time spent in other Schengen countries. It doesn't come with any obligations for getting set up in the French system. It's fine. Now, on the other hand, if you're a French person and you've been married to your spouse for a very long time, theoretically, they could apply for French nationality, which would require a B2 level of French. It should be, and it would now require the civics exam. Again, I don't know off the top of my head if you're exempt from the civics exam for nationality, even if you're over 65. I think it's only the 10-year resident card that you're exempt. You're not exempt from language requirement over 65 anymore. Yeah, but if you've been married to somebody for a long time and they can meet those requirements, I mean, they could be French and apply through the French consulate, and then you can both come for 4 months at a time and it's fine. All right, I'm going to take a quick scroll through the questions that were in the chat before we end. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them. Tyler, if you have a business that serves and only invoices US clients, what kind of visa best fits that situation? There is no visa that fits that situation, which is kind of the point. So either you set up a French entity that is going to invoice your US clients, you're getting the talent passport entrepreneur, and you're setting up a French company, and then it can invoice clients anywhere in the world. It can invoice one client if you are like working remotely and you want to set it up legitimately. It can invoice many clients, doesn't matter where they are. Or if you're going the profession libérale route to be self-employed, you need to at least show in your application that you're going to have some clients in France or the potential for clients in France. They're not going to give you a visa on the basis of I have a US-based LLC and I have clients invoicing in France and I can work from wherever. That's not a thing for visas. Kara, what visa would be best for creating a French humanitarian ONG? Well, it kind of depends on what the purpose of the ONG is. There are no restrictions on volunteering and working for volunteer organizations as long as you're not paid. So you can certainly come to France and, volunteer with an existing ONG on a long-term visitor visa, showing that you're able to support yourself and all of that. If you want to create your own, then again, you can volunteer for it. And if it's a true, humanitarian mission or non-lucrative, then it doesn't require any particular visa. Now, the tricky part comes in because any type of French association, you're not allowed to get paid for being on the board of the association, or like there's no type of profit, anything that's, a non-profit association. Like there's no profit. It's not paying you for just like creating and managing the association. That is done for free. But you can get paid for activities done like for the association. So let's say you have an association for teaching people English, like the teachers can get paid for the teaching work that they do. Or you have an association that's helping people, I don't know, like navigate legal situations in French. Like the translators or the interpreters can get paid for the work that they do. But if you're going to get paid for work done for an association, how? Is it that you're going to be self-employed and have a micro entrepreneur activity and the association is going to be one of your clients? Like you're teaching English, the association is a client where it's paying you for individual French language classes that you're doing for the association's members, or like the association could pay a salary to like I'm in multiple associations where there's one person who is an office worker who does the admin and the email and whatever, and the invoicing and all of those things for the association. So that would be a salaried position. But then again, you need to have a visa to be able to do that. Remy, could you theoretically spend 3 months in France for every 6 months, leaving Schengen and then coming back indefinitely, essentially staying in France for half the year through 30 years of retirement? I mean, you could, and then you're just a tourist in France over and over and over. I mean, theoretically, yes, it's possible. Are they going to like eventually they're keeping track of like when you go in and when you leave. So if you're doing that indefinitely for years and years, like eventually somebody might catch on and, not understand why you're not living in France. And also, I will say that doing this doesn't necessarily mean that you're not becoming a tax resident of France, because the thing is that, a lot of people think like, oh, there's a 183-day rule. If I don't spend 183 days in France, I'm not a tax resident. Well, if France is the place where you spend the majority of your time because you don't really live anywhere, France is probably the place where you're a tax resident. So, if you are 3 months in France and then 3 months in the UK and then 3 months in France again and then 3 months, touring, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, whatever, and then 3 months in France again, you're a French tax resident because you spent almost 6 months in France. That was half the year. You didn't spend more than 6 months anywhere else. France is a place where you spent most of your time. You're probably a tax resident in France. So you need to be careful with doing stuff like that. And I always get kind of nervous because I don't know what the justification is that, why would you want to do it like that if not to avoid admin and taxes and things that you kind of should be doing. If you go over on a long stay visitor visa and then move on to the 10-year residence card, well, then you'll be allowed to work on the resident card, or are there still restrictions? So it depends. And I'm going to give you an answer with a lot of caveats because even just giving a 10-year residence card for people on a visitor visa is really new. So if you have read Foolproof French Visas, you will be aware that for the very long time, my position is that a visitor visa is not a good path to a 10-year resident card or naturalization or anything like that. Now, EU regulations have encouraged member states to issue residence permits to people who have lived consecutively in the country for more than 5 years. It's a particular type of card called a 10-year EU long-term resident. As of right now, some of them are being issued with the ability to work. I don't know that that will continue. In the past, people who were on visitor visas who did end up getting a 10-year card were usually not granted the right to work. One of the requirements, of course, for the 10-year card is that they want to see that you've been actually residing in France for more than 5 years. And usually that means showing 5 years of French tax declaration. So you need to make sure that you're filing your taxes properly, reporting your worldwide income, all of that good stuff before you can get the 10-year card. If you're under 65, 10-year card requires B1 level of French and civics exam for the residence card. If you're over 65, you're exempt from those two things. We do have some people recently. I actually have a former client that I helped during COVID who contacted me and was really happy that she went to pick up her new card at the prefecture and they had automatically given a 10-year card to her husband and not to her. And then when they went to go pick up their cards together, the person looked at them and say, "Hey, why did he get 10 years and not you?" And so then she had it reprocessed for a 10-year card, which I thought was really nice. That was in the Loire. So we have been seeing more and more people get 10-year cards after 5 or more visitor renewals. But again, if people haven't been filing their taxes, if they can't show that they're living here, they're not necessarily required to give it to you. I've also seen cases of like when we renewed this past year a 10-year resident card for somebody as the spouse of an EU citizen. And one of the things they asked for in her file was they asked for proof of residence in France in her apartment for every quarter or every semester. I think it was every quarter. So I had to give them 10 years of basically like electricity, gas, phone bills. We didn't have the same bill for each quarter, but we had to give them one bill showing that address for each. Maybe it was every 6 months. I think it was every 6 months, not to show that she was actually living in France that whole time. So they're going to be asking for more and more stuff like this because the people who are doing the thing of, oh yeah, I have the visitor visa and I'm renewing it every year, but I'm only coming for 2 to 3 months at a time, once or twice a year. Like that's not flying anymore. That was flying under the radar for a really long time, but it's not working and you need to be really careful about that kind of stuff. Remy, can you buy private health insurance on a tourist visa so you don't need to rely on the public system? Yes, there are temporary healthcare plans that will cover you for catastrophic health coverage while you're in France. And be aware too that just because you're not on the French healthcare system yet, or you're here for a couple months, like you can still go to the doctor and just pay like the rate and not get reimbursed. The doctor's visit is 30 euros. So Can you recommend a company for those moving to France who need the coverage while they wait for their French healthcare card? Yeah, so we always send three different referrals to our clients for the healthcare policy because there are a lot of policies out there that are really expensive for no good reason. They don't give you better coverage or provide better service, and it's really just broker's fees for some of them. So we typically recommend either Mondasure or AXA, and both of them are going to be at the Relocate to France virtual summit. Okay, I really hate debunking the wrong people on Facebook, but Elizabeth, I recently read in a Facebook group that it would be possible to enroll as a student learning French and get a 1 or 2 year student visa on that basis, and then I can convert it to another type of visa when the French language course is complete. Is that true? I'm going to go Snopes level, partially true, mostly false. You can get a student visa in some circumstances for learning French. However, you need to have a really good reason and a strong academic motive for studying French, especially if you're a beginner, especially if you already have advanced degree, beginner at French, especially if you already have advanced degrees, especially if you're older and it's not clear what you would transition to afterwards. Learning French on its own, I mean, obviously would help you in the French workforce, but it does not give you any advantage in terms of an employer sponsoring you for a different visa. You would need to have a 2 year degree in a French public degree program in order to get any kind of benefit for switching to, a salaried visa or a passport talent qualified worker visa or something like that. You would need to earn a degree in a French university. So a couple things to consider is one, if you don't really have a good motive other than, yeah, I want to come to France to learn French for a couple of years and then figure out what I want to do, they're going to give you a visitor visa. If they think that you're going to be coming over to work or that you're interested in working while you're over here, because technically you're allowed to on a student visa, they're going to give you a visitor visa. If you're a total beginner at French and it's not clear why you might want to learn French now or what you might do with it, and you're saying like, oh yeah, I just want to learn French for personal reasons, visitor visa. If you already have a PhD in something, probably a visitor visa. And I mean, technically there's no limit on student visas, but again, what are you going to do afterwards? If you're 62 and you're getting a student visa, can you do it? Sure. But then when you finish your studies, you're not going to be able to go get a job in a French company. So then are you switching to a visitor visa and going to be retired? Like, what's the long-term plan? If you're younger, I mean, even if you're like in your 30s or 40s, if your plan is to learn French to a more advanced level, enroll in a degree program, get a new degree, and then find a job, that's great. You really have to look at what kind of degree program are you going to be doing afterwards? What are your options? How likely are you to get in? What are your job options going to be after you get into that program, after you graduate from that program? And, literally, what are your job prospects after that? Because if you're starting over in even your late 30s or mid 40s or whatever, being a senior in the French job market is 45. And there's a big problem of people getting laid off in their 50s or early 50s and then being unemployed until they reach retirement age. It's a big problem right now. There's also the fact that, even if you earn a degree at that age, it's wonderful, but then you're going to be graduating into a job market where you're competing with other entry level positions. So you really have to think about what are your options going to be, especially if you're a foreigner and you earn a degree in midlife and then you need to find a job that's going to be able and willing to sponsor you to stay. It's a lot. So you really need to think through the plan and make sure that you're in a good enough program to be able to make that plan happen. Kara, any visa type you apply for about a month in advance. You can apply a little bit more than that in advance, up to 3 months, but any long-term visa type, 1 month in advance is fine. Patricia, if making a TLS appointment this summer, is the French consulate in Washington slower in August? Any TLS better than others? They're all not great. I would avoid Atlanta if you can. There's at least one person there on a power trip who doesn't actually know any of the visa requirements, who always tells our clients the wrong thing. But other than that, there's no particular advantage to one TLS center over the other. They're all just sending things off to the consulate. August is pretty busy because you have all of the students who need to get their visas before programs start in September to early October. You also have all the language assistants. So now is the busy season. It's tough to get an appointment. Usually you can book an appointment the following week. We had people book appointments today. They're for the beginning of July. So you do need to plan a little bit in advance during the summertime. Once September hits, things will cool down. So if you don't have to be here for September 1st, I would say you want to wait till September 1st at this point to apply for your visa. Oh, okay. My spouse might retire before my next Casa Séjour renewal, which might mean his passport talent would end. So, I mean, if he switches to a visitor visa, you could too. You could also, but I mean, your visa is valid until it's not. So you don't necessarily have an obligation to change from a passeport talent famille, and he doesn't have to change from his passeport talent until it's time for him to retire. And I would say though, depending on how long you've been in France, it's probably better for him to hold off on retirement and renew the passport talent so that you can stay a little bit longer and get that 10-year card before or be eligible for the 10-year card at the next renewal. Unless you didn't say which passport talent you had. If it's a salarié en mission that doesn't count towards a 10-year card, then what I just said doesn't make a difference. Maria, have any details you can share on the Carte Bleue visa? Yes, they're in foolproof French visas. Salary of 59,373 euros per year, master's degree or 5 years of professional experience. Doesn't require work authorization. That's higher than 99% of French salaried employees' salaries. So it doesn't seem that high to American ears. It is a very high salary in France. Ursula, I'm a licensed US real estate agent. Can I translate those credentials in to work in France as a salesperson? Probably not. You would need to get licensed separately in France. Can I work remotely as a relocation specialist or use those credentials to get an entrepreneur or other type of visa? You need to set up a French business activity. So if you haven't relocated to France, you can't be a relocation specialist because you're not qualified to do that. I don't really know what you mean. If you were doing consulting for like real estate companies in the US, then you could, have consulting fees for them and have them be one of your clients. But can I apply at any TLS center? Yes. If you're in the US, you can go to any TLS center in the US. Dana, I hold a US passport but was born in the Netherlands. When obtaining notarized copies of my birth certificate written in Dutch, should I get them translated into French as well as English? You shouldn't have to. You should be able to request a bilingual version from other EU countries, and France is obligated to accept documents from other EU countries without translation. Judy, if I've been divorced, must I bring my previous marriage and divorce documents to the initial meeting at the consulate? No, they don't normally ask for birth certificate, marriage certificate, divorce certificate at the visa appointment. You do need to list previous names on your visa application, but they don't need any documentation. When you apply for the French healthcare system, you need to show any paper trail related to name changes. So if your name at birth is different from your name now, on your passport, you need to show the legal progression from one name to the other. If you got married, got divorced, and went back to your maiden name, then we don't need to provide that paperwork. But if you were born and then you got married and then, you were widowed, but you kept the name and then you married spouse two, we need to show all of that documentation. Tyler, my wife and I are both American. She's a licensed mental health therapist. She would see only American clients via telehealth. What visa do you recommend for her? So she would still need to be licensed and have a business operating in France. If she's working as a psychologist or a psychotherapist, she would need to have a license for psychotherapy and she would need to be licensed in France and the state where her clients are located. If she's providing counseling, so there's psychopracticien or, counseling or coaching or services that are like not under the umbrella of psychotherapist, or therapist, then she would be able to do it in France as an unregulated activity. But again, that requires having the support and going through all the steps to set up the French entity. Can you check various TLS offices availability before you commit to one? No, you can't. It's wicked annoying how they have set it up. You have to put in all of your information about your visa form and validate it all before you get to the calendar. And then you can't go back and cancel it to switch it over to something else. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to commit to the center before, well, either you have to commit to the center before you pick an appointment, or you have to do a separate visa application for each center and a separate TLS account with a separate like email, which who's got time for that? So yeah, not really possible, unfortunately. All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, if you do have more questions and you want to schedule an individual consultation, I'm going to put the link in the chat for that. This is a good way to discuss your personal relocation plans and timelines before you start working on your visa application. Typically, I recommend around 3 to 4 months in advance if you're going on a visitor or a family visa, 6 to 8 months in advance of wanting to be in France if you're going for a business visa. We are going to have the Relocate to France virtual summit starting on the 15th, and I'm going to again give you the link to sign up for that. And so, yeah, if you do schedule a consultation with me, we'll talk through your plans. We'll make sure that you have the right visa type. Um, and we'll put together a timeline for when you need to start working with us, whether your business idea is viable, what kind of documents you're going to need, etc. And then if you do end up becoming our client, we will apply the consultation fee as a credit to the cost of your package. So thank you so much for your time this evening or today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you all at the virtual summit. Have a good one. Bye.